There you go.
Judging from my last name, you might understand the reason of my interest in the Greek political sphere. My starting point was trying to explain the results of the 2012 elections in Greece. And to do that, the first thing I had to answer to myself is under which premises can I do that? What sort of dimensions should I use in order to calculate distances, for example, between voters and parties? And here I hit the first big hurdle, because the 2012 elections actually were the most chaotic elections that we had in the Greek politics since democratization started. And the reason for that was obviously the unclear positions of political parties on several political issues, the unclarity of criteria that voters had to choose which party to vote for, and of course the looming crazy economic political crisis going on in Greece at the time. So nobody was sure about anything. So judge this presentation as a photographic snapshot of a dimensionality of space, because it was an exercise I imposed myself to do before I can do any other type of analysis on voting behavior. So I will start a little bit with background of Greek politics for those of you who are not aware, although I see a lot of faces that are very aware of Greek politics here. So in Greek politics, the left-right identification was, until 2012, the strongest predictor of party choice. In many cases, we could say that this left-right identification was actually not a political dimension, if you want, but it was more or less the party identification for people. It was the intention to vote for people. So we couldn't really use it as an ideological dimension. However, you could not, yes. However, that happened as we moved on towards the present. In the beginning of the democratized era, and so from 1974 onwards, the two poles of left and right, or the central pillars of left and right, were PASOK, the center left political party, and New Democracy, the center right political party in Greece. Of course, this didn't remain like that, as in many other European countries, position on economic issues slowly converged in the 90s and 2000s. And of course, that required some sort of alternative for people to differentiate between the major two political parties that were fighting for the government, and this was, the solution was given by the valence issues. So which party is more capable to solve the economic issues at hand? The left-right, starting from actually differentiating being a political dimension, developed into something else. So it was based on this differentiation between the two large Greek parties that carried, if you want, the weight of left and right, but slowly started focusing outside the socioeconomic dimension. Since the two major parties were not differentiating themselves on economic terms, they started to find new issues to differentiate themselves, and so did also the left-right dimension. So these issues, these outside of socioeconomic dimension issues, were not owned by these two large parties. We have, for example, New Democracy trying to capture societal conservatism and nationalism, which were actually owned by other more populist, more right-wing political parties. And PASOK, on the other hand, in the 2000s, grabbed green issues, libertarian issues, and open accountability issues and e-governance issues, for example, that were also owned by different parties more on the left side of the spectrum. And here I use left and right as we political scientists use them, just to remind you. Despite the fact that left and right as terms start changing the content, they never stopped dominating the public discourse. So even now, in many cases, we use left and right to identify individuals and political parties. and to talk about the left bloc and the right bloc. But it was clear that non-socioeconomic issues became part of the left-right discourse. What happened in the 2012 election was that not only left-right dimension was in there and the discourse of left-right was in the game, but also a new dimension entered the whole political jargon, political discourse. In fact, it entered politics in such extent that there were two new terms created in the Greek language to demonstrate that the person was in favor of the bailout agreement with the IMF and the European Union, with the Troika as we call them, and those people who are, and political parties who were against. So you had a pro-bailout and an anti-bailout person, a pro-bailout and anti-bailout political party bloc. So clearly the left-to-right cleavage was a little bit outmoded because the new bailout cleavage was more important. It was actually providing a solution or a potential policy package to solve the crisis at hand. Analysis has shown that the new cleavage has become the single most important factor to structure party competition and predicting vote choice in May and June 2012 elections. So left-right outmoded, bailout dimension, very important. Okay, that's clear so far. What else we know about the 2012 elections is that there were elections with very high salience of the economy. What else is new? It was a big crisis. It's still a big crisis going on in Greece. And the solution is not clear at hand right now. So still economy, very high salient. The other thing that happened was that there were a lot of new small splinter parties that appeared in the political scene, some of which immediately after the 2012 elections stopped really dominating or stopped really being in the foreground of the media. Maybe some of them stopped even existing. So what happens here, these new splinter parties were based on this bailout cleavage, or the bailout dimension, because they disagreed with the main party that they used to belong to. So we introduced a new dimension, which structures vote choice, and we have very high volatility. It was the almost 50% volatility in 2012 election, which is the highest from what I've seen in the previous Yes, in the previous presentation, it was the highest in Europe for a very long time. And that, of course, led to all party loyalties collapsing. So, this is a background. The idea behind all this is that people should be asked two important questions. Where do you stand on the left-right, and where do you stand on the bailout dimension? Because that is how parties present themselves in the electoral arena in the 2012 elections. If we do that, that is what happens. What you see here are actually individual level self-placements grouped by the parties they were intending to vote. So what you see here is on the right-hand side, the usual suspects, the New Democracy, ND, Laos and Golden Dawn Party with XA here, that are supposed to or expected to be on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, you can see Syriza, that is a left, some say populist, some say not populist party, the Communist Party, and also some more left-wing libertarian parties. On the 90 degrees against it, let's put it like that, you have the pro and against bailout dimension. On the top part of the screen is the pro-bailout parties, and on the bottom part is the anti-bailout parties. Okay, this is what happens when you ask people where they place themselves. Now, the question that I had is actually what stands behind this self-placement answering? How does an individual know where to place himself on the left, right, and on the bailout? How do they decide? How does this work together with actual issues? So, in order to do that, okay, what explains the position on the two main dimensions was the initial research question. To do that, I had to rely on a voting advice application for data because the crisis didn't only hit the Greek economy, but it hit also the funding for election studies, as you can imagine, clearly. So that was one of the two voting advice applications that ran for the 2012 elections. It's from the group Preference Matcher, the consortium run from Zurich, and it included 30 Likert scale questions capturing the most important issues on the agenda at the time. It also captured two questions on self-placement, on left-right, and bailout. Okay, so what happened? I ran a factor analysis on this to see what's going on, what are the factors that are loading there. And after a orthogonal rotation, I had four independent from each other factors. And that doesn't tell you much. What I got as a result was this. Again, that doesn't tell you much, but here is in more detail what happened. So first factor, explaining 70% of the variance, includes issues such as solution to unemployment are flexible work conditions. The pay cuts should be done in order to overcome the crisis. Implementation of the memoranda, so the bailout agreements, are important to overcome the crisis, and so on. And for example, issues like loans to Greece have only benefited the banks and the lenders and not Greece itself. So for me, that was a clear factor loading important issues for tackling the crisis. The second factor was more perplexing. It included issues like privatization will reduce the deficit, that traditionally this is a left-right economic issue. But at the same time, it included issues like strong policing in town centers would be should be involved to tackle crime. That is not what you call a traditional economic left-right issue, but it's more of an authoritarian, libertarian scale issue. Then it went on for the funding for higher education should come from private or public sources, and as well introducing university fees. So the whole story about imposing a less public education system, and economic growth questions, and as well a question on participation of technocrats in the cabinet. So it was quite difficult to interpret what this factor could be. So for me, it was more like what we would expect of a catch-all left-right dimension should be. So economic issues with a little bit of something else. The other two factors loading on libertarian cosmopolitan issues like drugs, reducing defense spending for more welfare states, and accepting the geographical composite name for former Yugoslavic Republic of Macedonia, that is still an issue in Greece. And the other factor was clearly on the EU and the euro. So there we don't have much problems, and they only load 9% and 8%, they explain only 9 and 8% of the variance. So these are the four factors we have. Interestingly enough, there are two issues that have the highest uniqueness and don't load into any factors. That is the increased taxes on large corporations, which interestingly enough, it's not loading on any sort of left-right economic dimension. And that Greece should strengthen its ties with Israel. That could be anything, so that we don't worry too much about that. So what did I do? I tried to take these four factors and try to explain the self-placement on the two dimensions. So I hypothesized that because the bailout dimension was mainly the dimension that would give a solution to the economic crisis problem, should be explained by economic issues, by factors of economic issues, while the left-right self-placement should be mainly explained by cultural issues, simply because the economic dimension was already taken. What happened? So we have the four factors as independent variables, and left-right self-placement and bailout self-placement as dependent variables. The first model is without any demographics, the second model is with demographics. So left-right self-placement is quite clearly explained better by the libertarian cosmopolitan factor and this composite factor of economic issues and policing. The bailout self-placement is a clear economic dimension, loading on the issues tackling the crisis, and the very much loaded ideology about whether or not Greece should stay in the euro and stay in the EU, that was very much connected with the bailout as a whole. So no surprises there. Capturing also, so controlling for demographics, the results stayed. An interesting result as well was the fact that controlling for gender, we could find that being female actually places you more to the left and more pro-bailout. So interesting, also interesting gender effect there. So if I was to take the most important, the two most important factors here, the one explaining the left-right and the one explaining bailout the most, the space would be looking like that. So we have a completely turn on its head political space. And if we were also to add the positions of the political parties themselves, presented in orange, the political space would look like that. The interesting part is that the voters and the political parties have more or less the same position, only the parties are projected more to the extremes than the voters. Because it was so difficult to differentiate between the factors and to actually identify the four factors, I also ran an additional experiment or an additional analysis showing the two traditional dimensions that we as political scientists would think of as the important in political space. The first is what we call the traditional left-right, so the socio-economic dimension. I took all the economic questions, making sure that every mention to the IMF bailout and the Troika should be outside, so it doesn't, using the word bailout agreement would not influence the answer to the question. Cronbach's alpha is quite okay on that. And similarly, the social-cultural dimension, capturing everything from policing to law and order questions, citizenship questions, soft drugs, decriminalizations, and so on. Again, Cronbach's alpha quite okay. Results, you won't be surprised to find out that actually the social-cultural dimension is the one that explains better the left-right self-placement, and the socio-economic dimension explains better the bailout self-placement. Of course, the socio-economic dimension also explains, to some extent, quite a strong extent actually, the left-right self-placement. So left-right is actually a very dirty, unclear dimension. Okay, that is what the political space looks like, taking into account this differentiation between socio-economic and socio-cultural. And if we actually turn it to what we're used to see, that we see normally on the horizontal axis, the left-right, it should actually look like that. Because if the social cultural is the dominant dimension that explains left-right, it should, the placement of political parties on the scale, on the space should look like that. And still, if you know a little bit how political parties should be placed, is actually pretty much making sense. So just to summarize a little bit and not to take too much of your time, the left-right position is explained by more socio-cultural issues and a bit less than economic-related issues. And the bailout position is actually mainly explained by economic, pure crisis questions and the positions about the European Union membership and the membership in the Eurozone. What would be the potential explanation of all this distortion of left-right? Well, as I said in the beginning, the two major pillars holding the left and the right discourse were New Democracy and PASOK. And since they have moved together, they gave the right to outside more extreme political parties to pull the debate and pull the discourse about left and right to their sides. And now, because of many reasons of blaming the two major political parties for what happened and clientelist scandals and so on. These extreme political parties, on the right-hand side, the Golden Dawn and independent Greeks, and on the left-hand side of Syriza and Garcia, the two more leftist and populist, if you want, political parties on our respect. We have a call. Okay. They were pushing to differentiate themselves and to change towards the more authoritarian, libertarian issues, and change, reshaping the left-right into a socio-cultural dimension. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you.